A peaceful alien race is left to burn as the galaxy turns its back. But just when all hope is lost, a handful of unlikely human heroes defy the stars to answer a desperate cry for help. Betrayal, sacrifice, and courage collide in a mission that could save an entire civilization or end in silence. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to this channel and show some love by giving the video a thumbs up. Now let's move toward this powerful and unforgettable story. Once, the planet Velmara was known across the stars as a place of beauty and peace. Its skies shimmered with 3 moons, and its cities sparkled like jewels in the night. The Ashari, its native people, were known not for strength in battle, but for wisdom, invention, and art. Their voices sang in harmony, their hands built wonders of glass and light, and their hearts beat with kindness. But now none of that mattered. The skies of Velmara had turned red with fire. Where once there was music, now there was the scream of falling bombs and the crash of crumbling towers. The Ashari were no warriors. Their bodies were slender and delicate, made for calm council halls, not war zones. Their minds were sharp, their technology advanced, but none of it could match the brute force of the Varnock dominion. The Varnock were conquerors, cruel, powerful, and cold. They saw the Ashari not as equals, but as prey. City by city, colony by colony, the Ashari were falling. Their defenses shattered like glass under the relentless attack. Their ships, once symbols of peace, now lay in pieces across barren battlefields. In the capital city of Aliris, the last Ashari leaders gathered in the Grand Hall, which still stood though half its walls had fallen. Dust choked the air. Firelight flickered against ancient carvings. Counselor Nairin, the youngest among them, stood at the front of the chamber, trembling but resolute. His voice, though soft, carried desperation. "We cannot fight them. We cannot run, but we must not be silent." Around him the elders nodded grimly. High Elder Vorith, who had once been greeted with cheers in every city, now leaned heavily on a broken staff. He whispered, "Then we must call to the stars and hope someone listens." And so they did. Across the galaxy, the Ashari broadcast their plea. On every frequency and every language known, they sent a single message. "This is the Ashari. We are a peaceful people. We are dying. Our homes burn. Our children weep. If you hear us, please help us. We ask for nothing but mercy." The message, echoed through the stars, carried by hope and desperation. They knew they were asking for a miracle. Still they waited. Still they hoped. But the stars were quiet. Far-off worlds heard the message. Races who once called the Ashari allies now closed their doors. "It's not our war," some said. "They should have prepared better," said others. In the council chambers of powerful empires, leaders scoffed and turned back to their feasts. One general from a wealthy planet laughed and called the Ashari a lesson in weakness. Some scavenger groups even planned to visit Velmara not to save lives, but to steal what remained. Days passed. The skies grew darker. Enemy ships blocked out the sun. The Ashari gathered in shelters beneath the earth, whispering old songs and holding each other close. Nairin walked the halls, helping carry the wounded, whispering words of comfort he didn't believe. Every hour brought more sorrow. Every moment, without a reply, made the silence feel heavier. The young counselor stood on a balcony, watching the ruins of his city burn. He felt the weight of an entire race press against his chest. Then, something changed. It was just a flicker at first, a tiny light blinking on an old monitor deep in the communications room. A technician gasped, then called out, "Incoming response!" Others rushed to see. The message was from a small ship, far away from the edge of known space. It was human. The Ashari had heard stories of humans, rough, unpredictable, stubborn beings from a distant blue planet. They were not known for riches or great fleets. But they were known for one thing, their unwillingness to look away from injustice. The response was brief. Message received, "We are coming." Counselor Nairin stared at those words, barely believing them. Could it be a trap, a joke, another lie? But in his heart he knew it was not. Someone had heard them. Someone had answered. Below the ground, among the hidden survivors, the message spread like a spark through dry grass. The humans are coming. We are not alone. For the first time in weeks, hope returned. It was small, fragile, and uncertain, but it was real. Up in the sky, the Varnock ships continued their assault, unaware that something had shifted. The Ashari still had no weapons to fight back. Their city still lay in ruins. But somewhere out there, beyond the fire and darkness, help was on the way, not from empires or mighty armies, but from a group of strangers who had chosen to care. And so the Ashari waited. Their light had dimmed, but it had not gone out. Somewhere in the endless night, echoes of their cry had been heard. And soon, the stars themselves would begin to change. The signal drifted across the dark ocean of space like a lost voice calling out in the night. It had passed through asteroid fields, skimmed the edge of collapsing stars, and bounced off silent satellites, unnoticed by most. But on a forgotten outpost orbiting a quiet planet called Mireia 4, a small group of humans heard it. The outpost was old, a dusty station with flickering lights and rusty panels. It wasn't part of any major government or military. It was home to a handful of people who had once worn uniforms, carried medals, or lost family in distant wars. Now they were simply trying to live in peace. Rael Donovan sat in the dim control room, sipping cold coffee and staring at the stars. He had once been a commander in Earth's Outer Defense Division, known for his sharp instincts and unshakable courage. Now he wore a worn jacket and spent his days fixing broken scanners. When the distress signal arrived, a low, haunting message full of sorrow and desperation, Rael stopped mid-sip. He listened carefully as the voice of an alien spoke about children crying, cities burning, and a people on the edge of death. There was no demand, no strategy, just a simple plea for mercy. He replayed the message over and over. Something in that voice reminded him of battles he had fought and people he had failed to save. He got up, walked down the narrow hallway to the common area, and called a meeting. One by one, the others joined him. Tessa Miles was the first to arrive. A combat medic with a past full of loss, she had seen the worst of what war could do. Her younger brother had died in a refugee camp, and since then, she'd sworn to never look away from those who suffered. Next came Juno Adhikari, the station's lead engineer. He was quiet, thoughtful, and brilliant with machines. He rarely spoke about the day his home colony was wiped out, but it still showed in his eyes. Malrik Voss, the ship's pilot, strolled in late, chewing a snack bar and acting like he didn't care. But he was always the first to jump into danger when it counted. Last was Kaylin Stroud, a rough-edged weapons specialist with a heavy past, and a grudge against people who use their power to hurt others. Rael played the message for them. As the voice of the Ashari echoed through the room, a heavy silence settled. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with emotion. They're not asking for weapons. They just want someone to care. Malrik raised an eyebrow. There, on the other side of the galaxy, were 5 people in a ship held together with duct tape. What exactly do we do? Throw rocks at the enemy? Kaylin crossed his arms. We'd be flying into a war zone. No backup, no support, that's a death wish. Juno, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. I've seen this before. A whole race ignored because it's easier to turn away. If we don't go, no one will. Rael listened to them all. He understood the risks. He knew the odds were terrible, but his mind was already made up. We're not soldiers anymore, he said, but we're still human. And that means something. We don't ignore a cry for help. They argued for hours, voices rising and falling like waves in a storm. Tessa pushed for action, Kaylin warned of failure, and Malrik kept asking who would feed the ship's cat if they died. But when the dust settled, one thing was clear. None of them could ignore the Ashari's voice. None of them could live with themselves if they stayed behind. The next morning, the crew of the Solace began preparing. The ship wasn't much to look at. Patched with scrap, older than anyone on board, and groaning every time it accelerated. But it had heart. And more importantly, it had people who were willing to give everything for a cause that mattered. Juno reprogrammed the navigation systems to chart a stealth route through uncharted sectors. Tessa loaded the medical bay with every supply she could find. Kaylin checked and rechecked the weapons. Old models, but still deadly if used right. Malric gave the engines a final kick and said a quick prayer to whatever cosmic force might listen. And Rail stood before them, ready to lead. The ship lifted off from the station. The stars ahead seemed darker than usual. They knew they were flying toward danger, flying into the heart of a war that wasn't theirs. But it didn't matter. Somewhere out there, an innocent race was waiting. A race that had been abandoned by the strong, ignored by the powerful, and left to die in silence. The Solace wasn't part of any fleet. It didn't carry banners or belong to any nation, but it carried something far more important: hope. As the engines roared to life and the stars stretched into streaks of light, Rail looked at his crew. Each of them had their reasons for joining this mission. Each of them had known pain. But now they had something to fight for. Something greater than themselves. They didn't know if they would succeed, but they knew they had to try. And sometimes trying is the most powerful thing anyone can do. The ship Solace emerged from hyperspace just beyond the shattered moons of Velmara. The crew stood in silence, staring at the sight before them. Smoke and fire curled into space from the planet below. Explosions dotted the surface like falling stars. There was no need to guess they had arrived at a dying world. For a moment, no one said anything. The weight of what they were about to do settled heavy on their shoulders. Rail Donovan stood at the front of the bridge, his jaw tight. He looked down at the ruined surface of Velmara and thought of all the voices that had cried for help while the galaxy chose to ignore them. Behind him, Juno checked the stealth systems, making sure their presence stayed hidden from the Varnock patrols. Tessa's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the medical kits. Kaylin and Malric were below deck, loading the last of the weapons, double-checking their old but reliable gear. Everyone knew that if they were caught, there would be no rescue, no second chances. This was a one-shot mission. They entered the atmosphere low and fast, flying beneath the radar. Ash and smoke made the sky look like twilight. Wreckage floated in the upper air, the remains of what had once been graceful Ashari ships. The crew navigated through the debris, landing the Solace in a crater just outside the ruins of an old Ashari city. Everything was silent except for the occasional distant thunder of another bomb striking the ground. The air on Velmara was thin and hot. Tessa was the first out, scanning for life signs. Her monitor lit up with faint pulses, survivors deep underground. The crew moved quickly, ducking under fallen beams and sliding through narrow cracks in shattered buildings. They weren't soldiers anymore, but old instincts came back. They worked in pairs, silent and focused, always watching the sky. Deep, below in a half-collapsed shelter, the Ashari survivors gathered in fear. They had heard the Varnock searching the surface and thought this was just another trap. But when they saw Rael step through the dust holding out his hand, something changed. Their fear turned to hope. Counselor Naren, thin and pale, stepped forward. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You came," he whispered, voice shaking. Rael nodded. "We don't have much time. We're getting you out of here." Evacuation was slow and dangerous. The Ashari were too weak to move fast. Children clung to adults, many of them injured or sick. Tessa and Juno set up a small treatment center inside a half-buried temple, working without rest. Kaylin and Malric took shifts patrolling the area, laying traps and marking safe zones. Every step toward the ship felt like a gamble. The Varnock soon noticed something was wrong. Patrols grew thicker. Drones circled above. A massive transport hovered near the city, scanning for movement. The humans knew they were running out of time. That night, while the others slept, Rael gathered the crew and presented a desperate plan. The only way to distract the Varnock long enough for the Ashari to escape was to destroy their local command post, a heavily guarded outpost just beyond the city walls. "It's suicide," Malric said, shaking his head. We're 5 people with old rifles. Kalen leaned forward. But it's the only way. Tessa looked up from her med kit. If we don't do this, the Ashari won't make it. Not one of them. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Rael said what they all knew deep down. We didn't come all this way to fail now. At dawn, they moved out. The Varnock command post was hidden inside a fortified tower, surrounded by turrets and watch drones. But the crew of Solace had something the enemy didn't expect: creativity, speed, and the will to survive. They split up, striking from different directions. Malric used the city's old maintenance tunnels to sneak close and plant explosives beneath the structure. Kalen took high ground, sniping drones from broken rooftops. Tessa and Juno created a decoy group with sound bombs and mirrors, drawing fire away from the tower's front gate. Rael stormed the command post with smoke grenades and raw determination. The building shook with the force of the blasts. Alarms wailed. Varnock soldiers scrambled in confusion. And just as planned, the Ashari were moved quickly toward the waiting Solace. As the tower collapsed in fire and metal, the crew regrouped, bruised but alive. The mission had worked, but the enemy was angry now, very angry. The humans led the Ashari through the ruins, dodging falling debris and ducking under enemy fire. A full Varnock battalion was already on their trail. The ship came into view, its engines warming up. They had minutes, maybe less. Kalen took the rearguard position, holding off the enemy long enough for the others to board. He didn't make it to the ship. His last stand allowed everyone else to live. As Solace lifted off, fire filled the sky behind them. Malric pushed the engines to their limit. Fighters chased them, cutting close, but Juno activated a trick he'd prepared, a burst of electromagnetic noise that scrambled the Varnock sensors. The ship veered into an asteroid field, using the cover to break free. Finally, just as the last system warning screamed on the control panel, they reached the edge of Velmara's system and activated the hyperdrive. Stars stretched into streaks and the world behind them disappeared. They had done it. They had survived. And more importantly, they had saved hundreds of lives. The crew sat in silence, exhausted and heartbroken, thinking of Kalen. But somewhere, inside that sorrow was a small light. They had faced the impossible, and they had won. For now. The stars outside the ship. Solace shimmered like quiet witnesses to everything that had happened. Inside, silence filled the corridors. No one spoke for a while after the jump into hyperspace. The hum of the engines was the only sound, soft and steady, like a heartbeat that had finally returned to calm. They had escaped. Velmara was behind them now, but the memory of what they had seen and who they had lost was still sharp in everyone's mind. Rael Donovan sat in the pilot's seat, staring ahead at nothing in particular. His hands rested on the controls, but his thoughts were far away. Kalen's sacrifice haunted him. The man had fought like a wall, staying behind so the others could live. There had been no time to say goodbye. Just gunfire, smoke, and the sound of the doors closing. Rael had made many hard decisions in his life, but this one weighed more than most. Behind him, Tessa moved slowly through the ship's medbay, checking on the Ashari refugees. Many were resting now, their fragile bodies recovering from the stress and wounds of war. She adjusted a blanket on a sleeping child and gently wiped soot from an elder's forehead. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were red. She didn't let anyone see her cry. Not until she reached the end of the corridor and leaned quietly against the wall. There, with no one watching, she allowed herself a few tears. Then she straightened and went back to work. Juno sat in the engine room, legs crossed, watching the cooling coils pulse in soft blue light. He was running system checks, making sure Solace could keep going. The ship had taken damage. More than once they had flown with broken shields or flickering lights, but it had held. He smiled softly to himself. Old ships, like old people, had a way of surviving when it mattered most. He gently patted the panel beside him and whispered, "Good job, girl." The ship, of course, said nothing, but Juno liked to think she heard him. Malric, Usually the loudest of the group, was unusually quiet. He sat alone in the mess hall, spinning a metal cup between his fingers. He kept replaying the moment they left Kalen behind, the explosion lighting up the ruins, the enemy ships swarming. He had always hidden his emotions under jokes and sarcasm, but now even he couldn't pretend. "You were the toughest out of all of us," he muttered, "even if you snored like a beast." He smiled at the memory, and for a moment, it felt like Kalen was still there, sitting across the table, rolling his eyes. The Ashari were safe, but far from whole. Their planet was lost. Their cities were rubble. Their leaders were gone, and their future uncertain. Yet, for the first time in weeks, they had a reason to hope. Nairine, now the acting leader of the survivors, stood before a small window on the lower deck watching the stars. He had seen his people suffer, beg, and nearly break. Now, aboard this human ship, they were beginning again. When Rael joined him, Nairine turned quietly. "We are a people of light," he said. "We lost our world, but not our hearts. You gave us a chance to keep those." Rael nodded. "You still have a long road ahead, but you're not walking it alone anymore." The two stood in silence, looking out at the unknown. A few days later, the crew located a remote planet in a quiet system, lush, green, and unclaimed. The Ashari, though weary, agreed this could be their new beginning. It wasn't Velmara, it wasn't home, but it was safe. Solace landed softly, in a valley surrounded by tall trees and silver rivers. As the hatch opened, the Ashari stepped out, blinking in the warm light. Some knelt and touched the soil. Others simply breathed deeply. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a child laughed, running through the grass, and the others followed. Laughter, light, and new life filled the air. The crew of Solace stayed to help. They built shelters, planted seeds, and repaired broken tech. Tessa organized a clinic. Juno powered up clean water systems. Malric taught the older Ashari how to fly scouting drones. Even Rael, who rarely showed emotion, smiled as he helped a group of children assemble a solar panel with pieces salvaged from the ship. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the crew gathered around a fire with Nairine and the Ashari elders. They shared stories of home, of struggle, of courage. They remembered Kalen, not with sorrow, but with pride. His name would be passed down in Ashari history as the one who stood between life and death and chose to give others a chance. When it was time to leave, the Ashari stood in silence, watching the humans board the ship that had changed everything. Nairine placed a small crystal in Rael's hand, a symbol of their people glowing faintly with blue light. "Wherever you go," he said, "you carry part of us." Rael looked at his crew, Tessa, Juno, and Malric. They were tired, changed, but stronger than ever. As the engines lit up and the ship rose into the sky, they looked back one last time at the valley below. A new home, a new beginning. In the dark, endless night of space, small lights can still shine the brightest. The crew of Solace had not saved a planet. They had not ended a war. But they had done something far greater. They had answered a call when no one else would. They had chosen compassion over comfort, and in doing so, they reminded the stars what it means to be human.